They say the earth remembers every scream it swallows, and every secret it's forced to keep. And in the hills of West Tennessee, the dirt is thick with both, for beneath the roots of the magnolia trees and the iron shadows of the old Chamberlain plantation, something waits. It is not a ghost, not exactly. It is older than that, older than war, older than cotton, older than the cross, and it feeds on silence. Not one of the 73 graves is marked. Not one of the names is remembered, but the family who built their empire on them still smiles in oil portraits, their eyes frozen in painted gold, watching you as if they know you're about to understand what you were never supposed to. This story is not about justice. It is not even about revenge. It is about power and the price of preserving it, and how in 1863, in a year soaked in blood and fire, one family learned how to disappear, entire legacies into the soil, and still walk away, praised as patriots, heroes, industrialists, men of honor. But that's the lie they needed you to believe, and for over a century, the lie worked. The Chamberlains were not born into power, they bought it. They carved it with razors and contracts and charred bone. Their rise began, not in the halls of wealth, but in a pact, a binding that could not be broken by war, nor law, nor God himself, and the cost was 73 lives, all erased, all buried beneath the cotton fields. No names, no stones, only whispers and broken bones. Tonight, you will walk with me into the depths of that pact. You will hear what the papers never printed, what the churches dared not speak, and what the state chose to bury along with the bodies. This is not simply about the past. It is about how the past controls the present, how wealth becomes worship when built on horror, and how the Chamberlain Dynasty wrote their gospel in ash and blood. If you continue past this point, you must understand something important. This story cannot be unheard. It is dangerous not because it is false, but because every word of it is true. The first Chamberlain to set foot in Tennessee was not a planter, not a soldier, not even a man of letters. He was a debt collector. His name was Elias Chamberlain, and what he collected was not money, it was obedience. In 1829, he came south with little more than a forged letter of credit and a black leather trunk full of northern papers, all counterfeit and all convincing enough to fool a desperate county, drowning in post-panic poverty. He bought land. No one wanted, cursed land locals said, a stretch of soil where nothing grew right, and screams traveled farther than sound should. He paid in gold that glittered too bright and made honest men lie. He hired no overseers, no crews, just men from nowhere, who came at dusk and left before dawn. Some said they weren't men at all. But that's how whispers work in places that smell like rot, even in sunlight. Within 2 years, the Chamberlain land bore the finest cotton in 3 counties, not the kind that grows wild, but the kind that defies nature. Tall, pale fibers, strong as wire. No weeds, no droughts, no failure. Just yield after yield after yield. Elias claimed it was science, but those who worked the land knew better. Their eyes hollowed out by whatever they'd seen or heard or done, and at night, the ground itself seemed to hum, not with life, but with something darker, more aware. By 1833, the plantation had no official records of its workers, no slave rolls, no ledgers, no births, no deaths, just production reports and export logs printed in perfect script, sealed in wax, bearing a symbol no one recognized, a circle with 7 points surrounding an open eye and a serpent swallowing its own tail. Some said the Chamberlains had found a new kind of slavery, one that didn't require chains. Just silence. They built a chapel with no cross and held services no one spoke of. After midnight, Children were told never to look at the east fields where the cotton grew tallest and sometimes people would vanish from nearby towns, only to return a week later, mute, trembling with dirt under their nails, and no memory of where they'd been. This was how it began. Not with fire, but with whispers and deals struck beneath the surface, and the promise that if you gave the land what it wanted, it would give you everything in return. By 1841, Elias Chamberlain was no longer seen in daylight, and no one asked why not. Openly, not aloud, his sons handled the business. Now, tall, pale men with clean fingernails and voices like cold wind. They didn't smile, they didn't age, and they never left the property. Their names changed in every document, as if identity was a costume they wore depending on who was watching. The cotton trade soared, not just in volume, but in strangeness. Buyers reported fibers that never rotted, never stained, and never tore tailors. In New Orleans, swore the fabric stitched itself when wounded, and soldiers in Mexico wore Chamberlain linen like armor, walking through bullets that never broke skin. Southern doctors were told to keep quiet, Northern chemists were told to stop asking, and everyone else simply accepted the price of cotton had become silence. The Chamberlain estate grew wider, but not taller. It spread underground, cellars deeper than roots, tunnels that led nowhere or somewhere. No one came back from couriers, carried crates sealed in tar, marked only with that 7-pointed star, and a phrase in Latin that no scholar could trace. The phrase meant something like, "Memory is the wound that feeds." In nearby villages, children were born with gray eyes and crooked spines, always in sevens, always on the solstice. Midwives stopped taking jobs that led them near the Chamberlain property, because sometimes the babies weren't quite human in how they moved, how they cried, how they stared back. By 1850, a quiet understanding settled across Tennessee that the Chamberlain Dynasty was not to be touched. No one audited them, no one arrested them, and even when a federal agent tried to investigate his carriage, arrived empty, soaked in black water and filled with cotton where his body should have been. You have to understand, this was not just one family's secret, this was a region's curse, an entire county bent around a lie. So old. It had become tradition. The cotton-bought carriages. The cotton-bought churches. The cotton-bought souls, and beneath it all, the ground pulsed like a second heartbeat, waiting for the price to rise again. By the eve of the Civil War, the Chamberlain name was known in every Southern ledger, but never spoken on any pulpit. They had no portraits, no written biographies, no invitations to galas yet. Senators owed them. Land banks owed them gold, and generals owed them silence. There were rumors of entire brigades that marched not for flags or nation, but for the promise of Chamberlain cotton uniforms, that never tore boots, that never wore thin bullets, that curved just slightly off target, as if fate itself feared what lay under that cursed Tennessee soil. Local men were conscripted into silence, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of knowing too much. Wives woke to find their husbands standing at the edge of the fields, blank-faced, covered in dust, eyes fixed on something unseen. Mother swore her boy had vanished for 7 days, then came back with no voice and hands that trembled in time with the heartbeat of the land. She sent him away, but the soil beneath her cabin still bled when it rained. There was a rail line built in 1861 from the Chamberlain estate straight to a river dock that didn't appear on any map. Trains came only at night, cargo sealed under copper wire and bound in white linen, but never opened. The conductor had no name. His face always turned just enough to be a blur, and if you asked too many questions, you'd wake up with soil in your mouth and a dream you couldn't shake of a chapel with no roof and a bell that rang inside your bones. Priests came once from Baltimore. Young men armed with holy water and Latin. They did not return. But the chapel gained a new window, a stained glass circle with 7 shards of red and an eye weeping gold. No local would look at it directly, and birds never landed on its frame. In the dark, you could still hear the workers. No names, no past, no future. Just the steady rhythm of labor beneath the stars, as if they were bound to something older than. And chains, something deeper than debt, something no one dared name, even as it whispered back from the roots of the cotton. The blood, the breath of everything that grew there or died trying. In the spring of 1863, as Union forces marched through Tennessee, they avoided the Chamberlain estate, not by order, not by strategy, but by instinct, as if even war knew where not to tread. One officer, a hardened veteran of Antietam, swore the sky darkened unnaturally over that land, like the sun itself refused to bear witness. He described birds flying in circles, never crossing the boundary of the fence line, and his horses panicked at the scent of something, not animal, not man, but ancient and waiting. The family did not flee. They did not fight. They simply watched from their porch, unmoving, like statues carved from shadow. Their hands clasped around a cane of bone, their eyes glowing faintly under the brim of wide black hats. They offered no words, just a silence, so total, it made the birds stop singing and the air feel heavier than lead. A young soldier broke ranks and tried to enter the estate, drunk and laughing. His comrades watched him vanish between 2 cotton rows and never return, no sound, no scream, just a ripple through the stalks like breath over skin for hours. They waited until finally they sent a scout who found only the soldier's rifle lying clean, polished and still warm next to a patch of earth that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Doctors in the region began reporting dreams shared across counties, visions of a tall woman with no mouth and fingers made of twisted branches, whispering secrets into their skulls. While they slept, one could remember the words, but all awoke with bleeding gums and a single word scrawled in mud across their bedroom walls. Inheritance. The cotton harvest that year was impossibly rich. Stalks grew twice the height. Leaves shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight, and the fibers glowed faintly when touched. Buyers paid in gold and offered no questions. Ships left Louisiana ports, full of Chamberlain cotton, and not a single bale ever arrived at its destination. No, tea in London, not in Lisbon, not in New York. Every vessel vanished from the record, lost at sea, or erased from memory, as if the fabric devoured the path it traveled. This was not agriculture anymore. This was ritual. This was a transaction with something not from this earth, and everyone who touched that cotton knew on some level that they were binding themselves to something older than God and far less forgiving. There was a room beneath the Chamberlain estate. No floor plans recorded it. No servant ever dared speak of it. Yet, every member of the family knew its presence as surely as they knew their own names. The children were taken there on their 7th birthday, led down iron steps by torchlight into silence, broken only by the hum of breathless prayers, carved into stone walls in a language no scholar would recognize. Inside the chamber stood a table of petrified wood, surrounded by 7 chairs, each bearing a symbol not drawn, but burned into the grain, with no tool on earth known to man. In the center, a basin that never dried, filled with thick liquid, the color of rusted iron, that steamed even in winter and pulsed with a rhythm too slow to be human, too fast to be forgotten. One by one, the children were asked to look into the basin, never told what to see, never told what not to, but the ones who screamed were taken back upstairs and never permitted to speak of it again. The ones who didn't scream were given a key, the kind that didn't open doors, but opened truths. Terrible truths, buried in bloodlines and bone. The Chamberlains claimed they owed nothing to anyone. Yet men in robes darker than night came once every 13 years. They brought no horses and left no footprints, their hands wrapped in silk and their eyes covered with coins that glowed like dying stars. They entered the estate through the orchard and exited only after the oldest child vanished quietly from the dinner table. Neighbors spoke in whispers about the red mist that rose from the soil in October and the way the cows gave birth to stillborn calves with human teeth and bird eyes. Some tried to flee the county altogether, but their wagons never crossed the third bridge out of town, always turning back, broken axle. Always the same wheel, always on the 13th mile. Preachers warned their flocks of the curse, but their churches burned one by one during midnight sermons. No cause, no wind, just fire, erupting from the pulpits and crucifixes melting like wax before the congregation's eyes. Still the Chamberlains remained untouched, untouched by law, untouched by death, untouched by time, and still the cotton grew taller. Still, the land drank darker, and still the family sat in that manner, with their silence and their keys waiting for the next child to stare into the basin and remember what no human should ever remember. They called it prosperity, but it smelled like rot, the kind that comes from behind the walls, when something's been buried too long and dares to breathe again. 1868. The Chamberlain estate had doubled its output, more cotton than any other family in 3 counties, yet no new workers were hired. No fields expanded, no explanation ever offered when asked how they managed it. Walter Chamberlain would only smile and say, "The land provides." But the land was wrong in ways you don't write in ledgers or maps, wrong in ways that make animals scream before they're slaughtered, and mothers miscarry under full moons. Wrong like the air felt heavier. The closer you got to the well near the orchard, and the way your shadow sometimes didn't follow you back. Travelers passing through spoke of lights in the trees, like stars that had fallen, but refused to leave sparks of green that danced through branches, but would not burn them. And then there was the sound, a low humming, heard only at night, only by those who didn't belong, a tone that made men weep and horses kneel and guns jam. Without fail, Sheriff Ellis tried once to investigate this. Was 1871. He rode up with 3 deputies and a writ signed by the governor himself. They entered the estate at dawn. None returned by dusk. The next morning, their horses showed up at the courthouse doors without riders. Eyes burned out, reins tied in braids of human hair, and no one dared ride them again. It was after that the town stopped pretending, after that the map-makers erased the path to the Chamberlain land, and preachers marked it with black ash and silence. It was not forgotten. It was something worse. It was remembered only in nightmares and old warnings, told to children who wouldn't sleep. But the Chamberlains kept smiling, kept hosting dinners for visiting bankers and Confederate generals, men who left pale and trembling, clutching bags of gold and eyes that no longer blinked at thunder. They kept shipping their cotton by trains that ran on no schedule, and returned with cars full of limestone and bloodwood and statues of things that looked almost human. And the family kept growing more beautiful, with each generation, yet paler and quieter, with eyes that glowed faintly in the firelight, and voices that echoed even in silence, and hands that never aged, even as the war turned to ruin and the South forgot its name. The investigation revealed a darkness deeper than anyone had imagined. The Chamberlain family's operation was not just opportunistic greed, but a cold, systematic murder machine. They treated human life like a renewable resource to be harvested and disposed of. Without mercy, Josiah Creek had stumbled onto a horror beyond wartime cruelty. It was a calculated enterprise of death and theft. Corporal William Hayes arrived on the scene after observing unusual activity around Rosewood Manor for days. The late-night movements, the constant arrivals and strange chemical smells, all pointed to something sinister. Hayes initially thought he might be witnessing the capture of a runaway slave or deserter, but the violence and urgency of the search told him otherwise. Finding Creek wounded in the ravine confirmed his suspicions. Creek's detailed account exposed a network of killing and robbery that operated like a regular business with ledgers, chemicals to dissolve bodies and mapped graves. The Union command was skeptical at first, but the evidence was overwhelming, and Major General Rose authorized a full military investigation. On May 15, 1863, a company of Union infantry surrounded Rosewood Manor, while Creek led investigators to the converted barn. What they found shocked even seasoned military personnel. The barn was a hub of systematic murder, quicklime vats, rows of sorted belongings, and detailed maps of graves, numbered and matched to ledger entries, demonstrated chilling efficiency. Records showed the Chamberlains experimented with poisons, staged accidents, and medical methods brought in by deserters, De Cornelius and Edgar Polk, who used their skills to perfect quiet deaths. The family's business plan outlined plans to expand the operation after the war, using displaced people as future victims. But the family fled before arrest, leaving behind evidence that revealed the scale of their crimes. Rosewood Manor was seized and converted to a Union hospital. Its fields divided among freed slaves and refugees. A small historical marker now stands on a busy street in Murfreesboro, silently commemorating the 73 known victims. Many locals avoid the site haunted by the legacy of terror. Josiah Creek lived with the scars of what he uncovered. Walking with a limp, he dedicated his life to bringing justice for those lost. The Chamberlain Dynasty remains a grim reminder of how evil can hide behind respectability and commerce. The aftermath of the Chamberlain exposure sent shockwaves through Tennessee federal authorities, launched a massive manhunt seeking the family and their accomplices. Wanted posters spread as far north as Canada, but the Chamberlains had vanished without a trace. Some rumors placed them in Mexico, others in South America, and a few claimed Ezekiel boarded a ship to Europe using forged passports. Their fate remains unknown, though. Theories range from death during their flight to a quiet life in exile funded by stolen wealth. The two pale strangers who aided the Chamberlains, De Cornelius and Edgar Polk, were found dead in the Cumberland River, their throats slit. Silenced to prevent testimony, their involvement underscored the chilling corruption of medical knowledge for murder. The investigation took weeks with engineers from the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad helping exhume the graves. The quicklime had done its work, leaving mostly bone fragments that confirmed Creek's testimony and gave families painful closure. The network extended beyond Rosewood Manor, with accomplices in cities like Nashville, Memphis, Louisville, and St. Louis. Labor contractors, boarding house operators, and newspaper publishers had helped recruit victims. The operation had flourished for nearly 2 years, generating fortunes for the Chamberlains, while neighbors suffered wartime shortages. The case revealed a dark undercurrent of exploitation amid the chaos of war and Reconstruction. Rosewood Manor was seized by federal authorities and transformed into a military hospital for Union soldiers wounded in battle. The irony of a house built on murder, becoming a place of healing, was not lost on anyone. The plantation's cotton fields were divided among freed slaves and white refugees, creating a community of small farmers who worked together to overcome the dark legacy that stained the land. The mansion itself stood empty for nearly 20 years. Local residents avoided the property, claiming it was cursed by the spirits of the murdered victims. Attempts to restore the house failed, due to strange noises, unexplained accidents, and a pervasive sense of dread that made work impossible. Finally, in 1884, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad purchased the property, demolishing the mansion to build a rail yard and switching station. Today, nothing remains of the Chamberlain Dynasty except a small historical marker erected in 1963 on a busy commercial street in Murfreesboro. The marker simply honors the victims of Rosewood Manor. Their names known only to God, most passers-by are unaware of the horror it commemorates. But local historians continue to tell the story of the cotton fortune built on unmarked graves. Josiah Creek, the overseer who exposed the Chamberlains, survived the war and dedicated his life to helping federal authorities locate victims' families and explain the tragedy. The broken leg he suffered during his escape never fully healed, causing a lifelong limp. Josiah Creek's testimony at the military tribunal was crucial in establishing legal precedents for prosecuting war crimes. Although the Chamberlain family was never captured, he spent many hours with investigators helping them understand the full scope of the killing operation and identify accomplices throughout the region. Many of these accomplices were eventually caught and tried, but most received light sentences in exchange for cooperation. The psychological toll of witnessing such evil haunted Creek for life. He never married or had children, and rarely spoke of his experiences, except when testifying neighbors described him as a man carrying an invisible burden, someone who had seen too much human evil to fully trust in human goodness again. In 1889, 26 years after the discovery of the graves, Creek was found dead in his small cabin near the former Rosewood Manor. He left behind a sealed written testament addressed to the Tennessee State Historical Society with instructions to open it only after his death. The document provided further details about the Chamberlain operation that he had never revealed during official testimony. According to Creek, the 73 known victims were only part of the Chamberlain crimes. He estimated that the total number murdered was closer to 100, including transients, runaway slaves, and others whose disappearances went unreported. The family targeted vulnerable people on the margins of society, whose deaths caused little community disruption. Creek's final statement also revealed that he had suspected the murders for months before witnessing them. He noticed discrepancies in food consumption, strange late-night activities, and workers who vanished without explanation, but feared the Chamberlain family's power until the evidence became overwhelming. Most disturbing was Creek's claim that the Chamberlains were not unique. Rumors suggested similar operations at other plantations throughout the South, where wartime chaos covered systematic murder and theft. These rumors were never fully investigated, raising the chilling possibility that Rosewood Manor was part of a larger pattern of exploitation and violence. Historians are only beginning to understand. The Chamberlain case remains one of the most shocking examples of systematic murder in American history, reminding us that the greatest horrors come not from madmen, but from calculating individuals who reduce human life to ledger entries. In the chaos of civil war, communities scattered and authorities overwhelmed. The Chamberlains created a private kingdom of terror where desperate people seeking honest work found only death. What makes their crimes especially heinous is not just the scale of killing, but the cold, business-like approach to murder. These were not crimes of passion or wartime desperation, but calculated business decisions by people who saw others as sources of profit. The meticulous record-keeping, systematic disposal of evidence, and careful selection of vulnerable victims all point to a level of premeditation that defies understanding. The psychological profiles modern criminologists have made of the Chamberlain family show they were classic organized serial killers working as a group. Ezekiel was the mastermind, a charismatic leader who convinced his family their crimes were necessary to maintain their social and economic status. Margaret managed the logistics of the killing operation with ruthless efficiency. The twin sons Daniel and Samuel played distinct roles. Daniel was the meticulous record keeper, reducing murder to bookkeeping, while Samuel acted as the enforcer who took pleasure in the physical violence. The involvement of the Polk brothers adds another terrifying layer, showing how medical expertise was twisted to serve systematic murder. The Polk brothers were former Confederate medical officers who deserted after the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Recruited by the Chamberlains to provide medical knowledge, they helped develop quick and quiet methods of killing. The brothers' desertion and alliance with the Chamberlains reveal how war's chaos allowed sinister reinvention. Their expertise made the murders more efficient and left fewer traces. The horror deepens knowing how trusted professionals perverted their skills for systematic killing. Josiah Creek's accidental discovery was the turning point. The Chamberlain family's killing operation was so efficient they might have continued for years more with hundreds of victims. The system eliminated witnesses and erased evidence almost flawlessly. Their near escape from justice shows how difficult it is to hold such cold criminals accountable. The story warns us about the dangers of unchecked power and greed hiding behind respectability. The legacy of the Rosewood Manor murders stretches far beyond the 73 known victims. The case set legal precedents for prosecuting organized crime and war crimes. These concepts grew in importance throughout the 20th century. The Chamberlain.